Sigmund Freud. He gave us this revolutionary and, let's face it, pretty controversial map of the human psyche. You know, the id, the ego, the unconscious. But what if I told you that to really get his map of our inner world, we first have to look at a map of the world he lived in? Let's trace the journey that really shaped his thinking. I mean, that's the big question in psychology, isn't it? How do you even begin to create a model for something so complex, so layered, and, well, invisible as the mind? Freud's answer was pretty wild, and it didn't start in a lab. Nope. It started on the streets of some of Europe's greatest cities. And this right here is the key to unlocking Freud's whole way of thinking. The very structure of his theories, these big ideas about instinct, reason, and memory, it was all profoundly shaped by his own personal experiences in these key places. You could almost call it a kind of psychological geography. So, let's start our journey. We're going to trace Freud's intellectual footsteps and see how these cities literally became the building blocks for his model of our psyche. Okay, so his home base was Vienna, a city with really strict social rules, and he had this deep love-hate relationship with it. For him, Vienna represented that powerful, judging voice of society, all the ideals, the morals, the shoulds and should-nots that we internalize. In his model, he'd later call this the superego. But it was his travels to other cities that gave him the perfect metaphors for the clashing forces inside all of us. And our journey begins where his did, with a trip that was going to change everything. First stop, Paris. Back in 1885, a young Freud travels there to study with the famous neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot. But it wasn't just the science that hit him like a ton of bricks, it was the city itself. Just think about the words he uses here. A sphinx, part beautiful, part beast. It perfectly captures how he felt. Paris was this alluring, mysterious, but also deeply unsettling place. It felt like some kind of primal force that he just couldn't quite get a handle on. You have to remember, Paris was the exact opposite of his buttoned-up life back in Vienna. He saw it as a city just totally governed by instinct, by chaos, and by what he famously called the sexual component. It was this world of raw, untamed desires, a place that was both absolutely thrilling and, frankly, a little terrifying. And boom, this whole experience in Paris gave Freud the perfect real-world metaphor for one of his most famous concepts, the id. The id is that primal, pleasure-seeking part of us, right? It's operating on pure instinct, demanding what it wants right now with no thought for the consequences. For Freud, Paris was the city of the. But a mind can't just be pure chaos. There has to be some kind of counterforce, right? For Freud, the embodiment of that control was our next stop, London, which was the polar opposite of Paris. Freud absolutely loved England. Ever since he was young, he saw it as the ideal society. It stood for everything he valued: rationality, law, hard work, and maybe most important of all, self-control. It was a place where reason, not passion, was king. So you can see the contrast just laid out so clearly. On one side, you've got Paris, the instinctual, irrational id, and on the other, you've got London, the rational, orderly force of control. With these two opposing forces, Freud now had the basic building blocks for his map of the mind. And so London became the perfect symbol for the ego. The ego is the part of our mind that's like a mediator. It's trying to satisfy the id's wild impulses, but in a way that's realistic and won't get you in trouble with the real world. It's that voice of reason that's constantly trying to manage all the chaos. But how do these two forces exist inside one single mind? For that answer, we have to go to our final city. And here we are, Rome. For years, Freud had this what he called deeply neurotic longing to visit the Eternal City, but he felt this strange, inexplicable pull holding him back. When he finally made it, it gave him the master metaphor for his entire system. Okay, here's the crucial insight. Rome wasn't just another location on the map for him. Its physical structure, with all its incredible layers of history, gave Freud the perfect analogy for the structure of the human mind. He even gave it a name, psychoarchaeology. Let's just walk through this for a second. Okay, so picture you're in Rome. You can see the ancient Pantheon right there, but on that exact same spot, there used to be an even older temple. Now, try to imagine if all those past buildings from every single era were still there, all coexisting with the present. That impossible layered city, Freud said, that's exactly how the mind works. And this is really the magic of the metaphor. See, in a real city, old buildings get torn down to make way for new ones. But in the mind, nothing is ever truly lost. The past, our childhood, our traumas, our memories, it all survives, just buried under later layers. It's still there. So psychoanalysis, then, is like archaeology. You're digging down to uncover that buried past that is very much still alive. So in this layered city of Rome, all the pieces came together. The rigid morality of Vienna's superego, the wild energy of Paris's id, and the rational order of London's ego, they could all coexist. Rome provided the structure, that layered consciousness, where all these forces are constantly battling for control. And just like that, the map of the mind was complete. So what's the big takeaway here? Why does this all matter? Well, because this way of thinking, this idea of a deep, hidden, layered self, has had this massive influence on how we all see ourselves today.
Now, let's be clear. A lot of Freud's specific theories have been heavily challenged or even just thrown out. But his fundamental framework, this idea of a layered mind with hidden depths, has totally soaked into our culture. The poet W.H. Auden summed up this legacy perfectly.
A whole climate of opinion. Just think about that. We talk about Freudian slips, repressed memories, subconscious desires. We use these terms all the time without even thinking about where they came from. His ideas aren't just theories anymore. They're literally part of the air we breathe, the climate in which we think about who we are. And that kind of brings us to one last thought. If Freud's psyche was mapped out by Paris, London, and Rome, what about yours? What cities, what places, what experiences have become the building blocks of your own inner world? What does your map look like?